welcome back to my channel. If you watched my previous video, by now you already have an idea of how to make use of a set of measuring cups and spoons and also the digital scale to measure your baking ingredients. Today we'll be looking at the benefits and pitfalls of each method so you can make an informed decision on which works best for you. Let's start with the benefits of the measuring cups. When it comes to using a set of measuring cups and spoons, the biggest benefit, in fact, the only benefit I could come up with is familiarity. For those of you that grew up around bakers, it was what you saw them use. Or your mom was using it, or it is what your grandmother used, or it is what the person who taught you how to bake used. And in fact, you feel so comfortable with it that you assume that any other method of measuring ingredients is too complex or complicated. And then the fact that most recipes out there give their measurements in cups and spoons does not help matters at all. Moving on to the pitfalls, I'll focus on 4 disadvantages to using a set of measuring cups and spoons. While cooking can be an art, it's easy to get away with reducing or increasing the quantities of some ingredients. With baking, you can't. You need precision, you need accuracy. If not, you will not consistently get the same results. Now, in my previous video, I demonstrated how I used a measuring cup twice to measure flour. And when I transferred the flour into the bowl to get the measurement on the scale, it gave us 2 different measurements. So measuring cups and spoons do not give accuracy all the time. The method you use in filling up the cup can affect the actual weight of the content of the cup. The second disadvantage of using a set of measuring cups and spoons is the fact that it can be cumbersome. Imagine working with a recipe that calls for 1.5 cups of flour and probably 1 cup plus 2 tablespoons of sugar. Measuring the ingredients is not straightforward. You have to use 2 different sizes of cups twice to measure the flour. In fact, in the case of sugar, you are doing 3 times 1 cup and then the tablespoon twice. So this is actually cumbersome compared to the scale where you just outrightly measure your ingredients once for flour, once for sugar, and then all the other ingredients like that. The third disadvantage of using a set of measuring cups and spoons is the fact that it increases the number of utensils you have to clean up. As much as I love baking, I do not like the cleaning up aspect. So imagine when you are working with a recipe and you've already used your 1 cup to measure out water or oil. Down the list, you find out you've not measured your flour or sugar, and you don't have a second 1 cup to use in measuring your dry ingredients. Now you have to quickly wash that cup used for water or oil, dry it up because you can't afford to use a wet cup to measure dry ingredients. So you have to dry it up before you are able to use it for the flour or sugar. But in the case of the scale, you don't need to clean up the scale. It reduces the mess you have to deal with. The scale reduces the mess you are dealing with. The fourth and final disadvantage I would focus on today is the fact that using a set of measuring cups and spoons makes it difficult to either scale up a recipe or scale it down. What do I mean by scaling up and scaling down? I mean, if you have a recipe and you want to make a smaller size of it, let's say half of it, of course, you need to divide the ingredients by 2. Or if you want double the size, yes, you can double your ingredients. So for a recipe that calls for 1.5 cups of flour, for example, 1.5 cup, if I'm going to make half the size, I'll need to divide 1.5 by 2, right? So if I'm going to make the actual quantity called for in the recipe, I'll be using 1 cup and I'll be using the half cup to measure out the flour to get the 1.5, right? So to scale it down to half, I'll need to divide 1.5 by 2, which gives us 3/4 cup. Most measuring cups do not have one particular cup for the 3/4 cup capacity. So most of them come in 1 cup, half cup, 1/3 cup, 1/4 cup, and maybe a few have 1/8 cup. Now, you don't have 3/4 cup. What do? You would have to use a 1/4 cup 3 times to get 3/4. Okay, in a situation where the flour is actually 1 cup plus 1/3 cup, how are you going to deal with that? How do you work with that quantity? So it's a bit cumbersome having to work with the fractions, and even when you divide and get the correct fraction, you may not be able to get the cups and teaspoons that will give you the accurate fraction that you need. With a scale, you're not having to deal with all of those fractions. It's pretty straightforward. You just bring out your scale. I'll give you an example now. 1.5 cup of sugar is equivalent to 300 grams. So if I'm going to scale it down to half, by half rather, I'll be working with 150 grams of sugar. If I want double the quantity, I'll be working with 600 grams, and it's very straightforward and not complicated at all. If you are a hobby baker, you can actually work with the cups and spoons, because you may not get to bake often, you may not be under pressure to either scale up or scale down. But if you are a professional baker, trust me, you should work with a digital scale all the time. Now, a question I know most of you will have is, oh, what if the recipe I'm working with is given in cups and spoons? Yeah, I love to experiment a lot with recipes. So what I do is, if there's a recipe I'm trying out for the first time and the measurements are given in cups and spoons, as I'm measuring it out in cups, once I measure, assuming I measure the quantity of flour is 1.5. Once I measure out the 1.5 cups, I use my digital scale to check what it weighs, and then I write it down. I do the same for sugar and every other ingredient one by one. I take note of what they measure out on the scale. Then when I'm done baking and I'm so satisfied with the outcome that I'm willing to keep trying the recipe out or even scale it up, next time I'm going to use that recipe, I would work with the measurements I have documented in grams. So it makes it easy for me to work with, and I no longer have to fall back to using cups and spoons. The scale just makes life very easy for you as a baker. So I hope with these few points of mine, I've been able to convince you and not to confuse you on why the digital scale is actually a better method of measuring your ingredients than set of measuring cups and spoons. If you've learned something, if you've been able to pick up something from my video, you enjoyed it, please do well to like the video, drop a comment for me, and subscribe to my channel for more tips. And also, I'll be coming up with more recipes. Do well to turn on the notification bell as well, so that you can get an update every time I post a new video. Thank you.